My son locked me away like I was nothing, just to take my $500,000 home. The place where I raised him, where every brick carried my sweat. The betrayal was unbearable. But as I sat in that dark basement, I remembered something they forgot. The law was on my side. The house was in my name. And when I acted, their dreams came crashing down. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat alone in the living room that evening, the house quiet except for the slow ticking of the old clock on the mantel. The silence felt heavy, almost like it was pressing against my chest. My son David and his wife Melissa had left for a weekend trip with the kids. The laughter of my grandchildren no longer echoed through the halls. Instead, all I had was time to think about how things had gotten to this point, how the boy I raised, the boy I gave everything to, could plan to take away the very home I built with my own hands. I thought back to the years when money was always tight, but I found a way to provide. I remembered writing that first tuition check for David's college, $60,000, that nearly cleaned out my savings. I could have kept that money for myself, for retirement, but I told myself, this is for his future. I worked double shifts to make sure it was paid in full. Later, when he graduated, I surprised him with a car. It wasn't brand new, but it cost me $25,000, more money than I had ever spent in one moment. I wanted him to feel proud, to know he could start life without the struggles I had faced. And then there was this house. Every month, every bill, every repair, I carried it. I paid the mortgage until it was mine, kept the roof patched when storms rolled through, and covered the taxes even when I had to cut back on groceries to do it. Tens of thousands poured into this place over the years, but I never thought of it as just money. I thought of it as love, poured into bricks and wood and stone. But my sacrifices weren't only about money. They were pieces of myself. I remembered the vacations my wife, Mary, and I dreamed of taking, the cruise we talked about when we were younger. We never went because there was always another expense for David. When friends invited me out, I stayed home, saving every dollar for his tuition, his needs, his comfort. There were weeks I lived on beans and rice, weeks I patched up old shoes instead of buying new ones, just to make sure he never had to feel the kind of hunger and struggle I grew up with. It wasn't just about feeding him or buying him things. It was about giving him the sense that he mattered, that his father believed in him. I gave up pieces of my own dreams, thinking his life would be brighter if I carried the burden. Now, as I looked around the house, every corner told a story. The hardwood floor beneath my feet, I laid it myself, board by board, after long days at the factory. The fireplace mantel held the photo of Mary in her wedding dress, smiling like the whole world belonged to us. This wasn't just a house worth $500,000 on the market. It was the heart of my family, the vessel of every memory we had built together. And yet, that was what David wanted to take. He wanted me out, tucked away in some nursing home, so he and Melissa could cash in on the very place I bled for. The betrayal wasn't just about money. It was about erasing me, about making me a stranger in the home I had given my life to. I felt the sharp contrast between what this house once meant and what it meant now. Once the living room was filled with laughter, with Christmas mornings and birthday parties, with friends and family gathering around the dining table. Now it was filled with silence, a silence that reminded me that the love I thought was unshakable could be twisted by greed. The wedding photo that once symbolized a lifetime of devotion now reminded me of promises broken, not between Mary and me, but between me and my own child. The very walls seemed to whisper betrayal, and the ticking of the clock no longer felt steady and calm. It sounded like a countdown, a reminder that time was running out for me to act before I was erased from my own life. At first, all I could feel was the hurt. My heart ached with a heaviness I couldn't put into words. My son, the boy I had carried on my shoulders, the boy I had worked nights for, the boy I had believed in, he saw me as nothing more than an obstacle. The pain of that realization was deeper than any wound, deeper than any sickness or injury. Betrayal by blood cuts in a way no knife ever could. I found myself whispering into the emptiness of the room, almost like Mary could hear me. Maybe I was blind, Mary. Maybe I gave too much. Maybe I thought money could buy his love, could buy his respect. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. My voice cracked as I spoke those words, because admitting them made me feel smaller than I ever had in my life. I had believed that love and sacrifice were enough, that a child raised with so much given would grow up grateful. But what I faced now was proof that love without boundaries, sacrifice without limits, can turn into weakness in the eyes of those who take. Still, as I sat in that old armchair, staring at the walls I had painted, I felt something change inside me. The pain didn't vanish, but it hardened into something else. The shock faded, and in its place came a realization. If I didn't act, if I let this betrayal swallow me, they would bury me in this house and call it mercy. They would strip away everything I built, everything Mary and I sacrificed for, and they would do it without guilt. But I had something they didn't. I had the truth. The deed was in my name. The law was on my side. They could call me old, useless, or in the way, but they couldn't erase the fact that this house belonged to me. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of power, a reminder that I wasn't helpless. I rose from that chair, the leather creaking under me, and walked slowly to the cabinet in the corner of the room. My hands trembled as I opened the drawer, but not from fear, this time from determination. Inside was a folder, worn and thick with papers. I pulled it out and placed it on the table. One by one, I laid out the documents: the deed to the house, the insurance policies, the tax statements. All of them bore my name, not David's, not Melissa's. Mine. Seeing those papers spread before me felt like armor, like proof that I wasn't powerless. They might have treated me like a burden, like a man too weak to matter, but the ink on those pages told another story. This was still my house, still my life. And now I was ready to fight for it. I sat back down and looked up at Mary's photo on the mantel. Her smile was soft, steady, like she was urging me forward. I whispered, "Mary, they think I'm weak, that I'll just fade away. But they're wrong. They're about to see what I'm made of." I could almost hear her voice in the back of my mind, reminding me of the strength she had always believed I carried. For years, I had let grief and loneliness make me soft. But now I felt a different fire, a determination I thought had died with her. I wasn't just going to sit and let them write me out of the story. I was going to take back control. Before I put the papers away, I picked up my phone. There was a voicemail from David, his voice casual, dismissive, reminding me not to mess with anything in the house while they were gone. I hovered my finger over the call button for a moment, tempted to respond, but instead I deleted it without listening to the rest. It was a small act, but it meant everything. For once, I chose not to let his voice control me. I chose silence. I chose my peace. It was a symbolic step, but it was the first real sign that I was taking control of my life again. The house around me felt different then. The armchair I sat in no longer seemed like a prison of old age, but a throne where I had made my decision. The ticking of the clock no longer mocked me, but reminded me that my time wasn't over yet. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the corners, felt like a witness to my resolve. I wasn't the helpless old man they thought I was. I was the man who built this house, who paid every bill, who carried the weight of a family on his back. And I was about to remind them of that in a way they would never forget. That night, as the sun set through the living room window and painted the walls in shades of gold, I knew the tide had turned. Chapter 1. Of this betrayal had broken my heart. But Chapter 2 lit a fire in me. The next step was clear. The papers were ready. The law was on my side. And soon David and Melissa would discover that the man they had underestimated still had plenty of fight left in him. If you're still watching and find the story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. I woke before sunrise and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of plain coffee, the kind I've made for decades. Nothing fancy, nothing sweet. The house was quiet, just the hum of the fridge and the soft ticking from the hall. In that quiet, the shift inside me from the night before settled like a stone. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't hurt and drifting. I was clear. I picked up the folder, felt its weight in my hands, and knew exactly what I had to do. I called Michael Harris at 8 on the dot. He'd handled simple things for me years ago, a will update after Mary died, and a small dispute with a contractor. He answered on the second ring, steady voice, the same patient tone I remembered. I told him what was happening. I kept my words clean and plain. My son and his wife were planning to push me out and sell the $500,000 house I built and paid off. I said it once, and then I stopped talking. I let the silence carry my meaning. Michael didn't hurry me. When he finally spoke, his words came slowly and clearly, like a level laid down on a board. Tom, the deed's in your name. Legally, this is your property. You decide who lives there, who doesn't, whether it's sold, and when. No one can move you or liquidate this asset without your consent. I closed my eyes and let that line fill the room. It wasn't just the law, it was oxygen. Come by today, he added. Bring your papers. We'll make sure you're protected and get a plan in place. I printed a fresh copy of the deed, slipped the originals into a big manila envelope, and drove into town. The steering wheel felt solid under my hands. The morning light ran off the hood. For the first time in a long time, my grip didn't tremble. It surprised me, that solidity. The body remembers before the mind does. I parked outside Michael's office, a small brick building on Main Street, with a brass plate by the door. Inside, the air smelled like paper and lemon polish. The receptionist looked up with kind eyes behind simple glasses. "Good morning, sir. Are you okay?" No one in my family had asked me that in years. The question tapped a soft place in me I didn't know was still there. "I will be," I said, and felt the truth of it as the words left my mouth. Michael shook my hand and led me into his office. We sat across from each other at a walnut desk. He read the deed, the tax statements, the homeowner's insurance, every line, every signature. He slid a legal pad toward me and wrote as he spoke. Step 1, we secure certified copies of the deed from the county recorder. Step 2, we place a letter on file with your bank and the county that no liens or transfers are authorized without your notarized signature. Step 3, we prepare a notice of entry refusal and a simple letter that clarifies you have not transferred or gifted any interest to David or Melissa. He looked up. And step 4 is a decision only you can make, whether you want to keep the house or sell it. My answer came faster than he expected. I'm going to sell it. The room went quiet for a second. He nodded slowly. Then we do this clean and fast. No noise, no warning. He picked up the phone and asked his paralegal, Jenna, to pull a quick public records check on David and Melissa. Nothing nosy, just county-level civil dockets, liens, judgments, anything that might blow back on me during a sale. While he waited for Jenna, he drafted 2 letters for me to sign. My hand didn't shake. The pen moved the way it used to when I signed paychecks over to the mortgage company. Firm, straight, final. That feeling in my fingers. It was new and old at the same time. Control weights it. You can feel it in the wrist, in the bite of a ballpoint against thick paper. We walked next door to the notary. The notary asked for my driver's license, looked from the photo to my face, and then back to the papers. She stamped each page with a heavy thunk, the kind of sound that tells you something just became official. On the way back through the lobby, Jenna came toward us with a thin stack of printouts. She lowered her voice. "Mr. Harris, I found a civil judgment in Melissa's maiden name for $48,600. It's from a supplier tied to her online boutique. The docket shows a recorded judgment last year. There's also an installment plan listed, and it looks like they fell behind." She turned one page. "And David's name appears in 2 small claims cases for overdue credit accounts, around $22,000 combined. There's one more thing. There's an online pre-qualification letter from a credit union. The application notes a future sale of this address as expected funds. She met my eyes, careful, respectful. "Sir, are you okay?" I let a breath out. It was like watching a storm take shape on a radar screen. Nothing I hadn't felt in my bones, but still hard to see. "I'm fine," I said. "You just gave me context." Michael slid the printouts back into a folder. "This doesn't change your position," he said. "It explains theirs." He tapped the folder. "Motive is not a legal defense, but it's useful for strategy." I left his office and walked 2 blocks to the bank. I've used the same branch for years. The tellers know my face. The manager, a woman named Tasha, came out from behind her glass wall when I asked to speak to someone about account protections. We sat at her desk, a small plant in the corner, a photo of her kids in soccer uniforms. I told her I wanted a note on my accounts, savings, checking, and the safe deposit box, that no changes or withdrawals above a small amount could be made without me in person, with identification. She printed a form and slid it over. "We can add a password phrase as well, Mr. Miller. Only you will know it." I wrote the name of Mary's favorite song, not because I needed the extra protection, but because I wanted something of her standing guard with me. When we finished, Tasha gave me a look that people reserve for their own parents. "Do you have someone to call if you need a ride home? Are you feeling all right?" The gentleness in that question cut deeper than anything David had said. A stranger cared more than my own blood. I heard my voice come out steady. "I'm fine. Thank you for asking." On the way home, I called Rick Johnson. Rick has sold houses in this county since before David was born. He knew Mary, he knew my porch and the way the afternoon light warms the front steps. I didn't dress it up. I told him I wanted to sell, and I wanted it done quietly. He didn't ask for gossip. He asked for numbers, comparable sales, timing, access. "Tom," he said, "we can list off market to a set of cash buyers. If you want speed, we price it at fair market and vet proof of funds up front. If you want to chase the top dollar, we stage and go public. But I hear in your voice that you want clean. We can do clean." I told him clean was the word. We set a time for him to come by that afternoon. Before Rick arrived, the house had to pass through the part of the day that hurts the most, late lunch, when the sun is bright and there should be noise. I set a simple sandwich on a plate and sat at the dining table. I saw the ghost of every birthday we'd had there. Balloons, wrapping paper. Mary had frosting on her hands and laughter in her eyes. I heard in my head the words David had thrown across this same table 2 nights earlier when all of them were here, and I slid my chair in slowly. "You're always underfoot," he'd said, pushing the salt closer to himself like my reach offended him. Melissa smiled without smiling. "We need space. You know how it is." Her voice carried that sugar that cuts like a blade. The air had gone thin in my lungs. I had swallowed it. I had pretended it was nothing. Now I set the plate aside and stood up. I walked to the living room and looked at the old armchair by the window. My chair, the one Ethan had pointed at, laughing when a leg wobbled. "Grandpa, that chair's broken," he'd said, looking to his mother for approval. "It looks like trash." Melissa hadn't corrected him. She had nodded toward the corner. "We should move it out of the way." I had said nothing, but I had felt something set in my chest. Not a crack. A setting. Rick knocked it too. He came in with a clipboard and the kind of energy that makes an old house stand a little straighter. He walked through each room without comment. He touched the kitchen counter with the back of his hand, the way builders test the set on tile grout. Out on the porch he stood and watched the street, judging the light, the angle, the feel. "This is a good house," he said. "You can feel it in the quiet." We sat at the kitchen table, and he talked through the plan. "I'll bring 3 investors who close in cash. No inspections that drag. They'll still want a quick look, but they know what they're buying. You'll decide. If you accept, we can close in a week." He slid a 1-page agreement toward me. "This authorizes me to present the property off market for 7 days and collect offers. No sign in the yard, no public listing. The paper was smooth under my palm. My hand, the same hand that had shaken when I ate alone, was steady as I signed. I watched the ink settle into the fibers. It felt like putting a beam into place and hearing the frame tighten. Rick packed his folder and told me he would call by evening with times for visits. "Tom," he said at the door, "I know this isn't easy." I looked past him at the yard I had mowed every week. "It's necessary," I said, and realized the difference. Easy isn't the goal. Right is. They came home that night full of noise, sunburned from their trip, plastic bags from the outlet mall knocking against their legs. I was in the kitchen rinsing a glass. David opened the fridge like it owed him something. "We need to talk," he said, not looking at me. Melissa set 3 bags on the counter with a thud, then looked right at me. "We've run the numbers," she said. "It's not working having 3 generations in one house. It's too much. We need a plan." She slid a printed spreadsheet across the table. Colors, columns. A line that read "Facility" with a monthly figure circled. There was a time the sight of all those numbers would have made me feel small. Not today. "You've been generous," Melissa went on, like she was patting a dog. "But this is the responsible thing. We can help you downsize. The market's good. We can list quickly." She waited, certain I would agree. David ran his finger down a column. "If we sell at 500 after taxes and fees, there's plenty to set you up somewhere manageable. We can handle the process so you don't have to worry." I let their words sit on the table, next to the spreadsheet, next to my glass with a ring of water under it. I saw the confidence in their faces, the ease of people who believe the outcome is already set. I remembered what Michael had said. Motive explains behavior. It doesn't make it right. "You've done a lot of thinking," I said. My voice came out level, not a bit of tremor. "I have too." David leaned back, folding his arms, that smirk he uses when he thinks he's won. "What's your plan, then?" I looked at him and saw a boy standing in my boots, asking for gas money, asking for another chance, asking for help. Now he was a man who had forgotten every yes I'd ever given. "My plan," I said, "is to sleep in my own bed and drink coffee in my own kitchen." Melissa's eyes sharpened. "We're trying to do this the easy way," she said. There it was again. Easy. The word they love is when the cost is someone else's pain. David slid another paper toward me, an old letter in my handwriting. I recognized it right away. A note I'd written years ago when they moved back in after he lost a job, welcoming them to stay as long as they needed. I had written, "This is your home too, because that's what fathers write when they want their children to feel safe." David tapped that line. "See? You said it yourself." I picked up the paper, turned it once, and set it down. "I remember that letter," I said. "I meant you were welcome. I didn't sign away my name." He didn't like that answer. He needed the old me, the one who apologized for taking up space. I wasn't that man anymore. The conversation didn't explode. I didn't shout. I let them talk. They cited market trends and the benefits of good facilities. They used soft words like dignity and care, words they had polished to justify the thing they wanted. I watched their mouths move and thought of Jenna's printouts. 48,600, 22,000, a pre-qualification depending on a future sale. The numbers made a quiet drumbeat under their sentences. They thought they were conducting a meeting. In truth, they were revealing themselves. I kept my face still, my voice even. This wasn't the place to fight. This was the place to learn. In the morning, I went back to Michael's office. Jenna had a file waiting. "We pulled certified copies of your deed," she said, sliding the crisp papers to me. "And I prepared a notice for the recorder's office flagging unauthorized attempts to file anything on your parcel number." Michael came in and closed the door behind him. "One more thing," he said. "We looked at the county recorder site last night. Someone ran an online preliminary title inquiry on your property 2 weeks ago, referencing a potential listing. There's no filing, but it's in the search history attached to the parcel. Public access logs show the IP originated from a residential address on your street." He let that hang a second. He didn't need to say the house number. I understood. "We can't assume intent," he added, careful as always. "But we can respond with clarity." He slid a letter across the desk. It was a simple statement on firm letterhead, addressed to interested parties, clarifying that I had not authorized any agent, lender, or family member to act on my behalf with respect to the property, and that any representation to the contrary would be considered fraudulent. It was a calm document. It was also a wall. We set 3 buyer walkthroughs for the next day with Rick. Noon, 2, 4. No signs, no chatter, just quiet footsteps through rooms that still held my life. Before the buyers came, I drove to the county building and asked for one more certified copy of the deed, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to hold it. The clerk, a gray-haired man with a wedding ring worn thin with time, took my request and looked up at me over the counter. "You good, sir?" he asked, like a neighbor across a fence. The question struck the same place Tasha had touched. "Better than yesterday," I said. He smiled like he knew exactly what that meant. Back home, I tightened a loose screw on the front door handle and wiped the dust from the stair rail. I didn't dress the house up. I didn't bake cookies or light candles. I let it be what it was, a solid place built one paycheck at a time. The first buyer walked the perimeter, checked the gutter lines, and asked about the age of the roof. 9 years, I told him. I saw the way he looked at the porch columns, the way he pressed a thumb into the wood and nodded at the firmness. The second buyer ran a hand over the banister like he was reading a sentence in Braille. The third stood in the living room and looked at nothing, which is how you look when you're trying to feel a house. Rick kept things moving, professional and quiet. Each time someone left, he wrote a short note on his pad and gave me the smallest of nods, the kind a man gives when the numbers in his head add up. That evening, David came by alone. Melissa must have told him to play good cop, or maybe he was just curious. He walked into the kitchen like he still owned the air in it. He set his phone down, screen facing up, spreadsheets open. "I talked to a realtor," he said, like he was telling me something useful. "He thinks we can get even more than 500 if we do a few updates. He has a stager who can make this place look younger." He smiled, satisfied with the plan he thought he was presenting. I poured water into a glass and drank it slowly. "David," I said, "the house is already spoken for." His smile didn't break. He thought I was bluffing. "By who?" he asked. I didn't answer. I wasn't about to explain my strategy to the people I needed to surprise. He shifted, a flicker of something in his eyes. "You can't do this without talking to us." I let the quiet do the work. Finally, I said, "I just did." He tried another angle and reached for the old letter again, the one with my handwriting. He held it up like a badge. "You promised this was our home." I looked at the paper, then at his face. "I promised you safety," I said. "You answered with a spreadsheet and a schedule for where to put me." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You're confusing kindness with surrender. That confusion ends today." He laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because that's what people do when the ground moves under their feet. "You're going to regret this," he said. The words hung there. I remembered 100 times I had bailed him out of some small mess, covered a late fee, called a landlord, paid a ticket. I remembered him saying those words then too, but with a different meaning. I set my glass down. "I've regretted much worse," I said, and saw him hear it. After he left, I sat in the armchair and watched the streetlights come on one by one. The room shifted again, not back to what it used to be, but forward into what it needed to become. I thought of Jenna's folder and the numbers in it. 48,600, 22,000, the pre-qual note. I thought of the public access log with my parcel number on it. I thought of Tasha's question, the clerk's question, and the receptionist's question, "Are you okay?" All three had reached for me when my own family hadn't. It didn't make me bitter. It made me focused. Rick called just after 9. "I have 2 offers," he said. Both cash. One is clean and fast at $485. The other is $500, but they want a 7-day inspection window. The first buyer can sign tonight. I've seen their proof of funds. It's real. I didn't hesitate. Take the clean one, I said. Send me the paperwork. He emailed the documents. Michael reviewed them in minutes and gave me the go-ahead. I signed with a steady hand, page after page, initial after initial, each mark a brick set in a straight line. When I finished, I didn't feel giddy. I felt centered. The house that had been used to make me small had become the tool I used to stand up. I shut the laptop and looked at Mary's picture. They think I've lost, I said into the dim room, but the game just started. The sentence didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a promise I finally made to myself. I picked up my phone and, without opening it, switched it off. No notifications, no late-night messages to drag me back into their storm. The silence that followed felt like a clean room after a long winter, windows open, air moving. Before I went to bed, I took the certified deed and slid it into the safe deposit envelope I'd picked up at the bank. I put the envelope into my old briefcase, the one Mary bought me for our 20th anniversary. The leather was worn smooth by years of use. I laid the briefcase by the door. Tomorrow would bring paperwork, calls, a timeline from Rick, and a closing date from the title company. It would also bring something else, something only I knew. Michael had asked Jenna to run one more search before we closed, a standard public records sweep to make sure no surprise liens had been filed. While she ran it, she had typed David's full name into the state court portal, then Melissa's maiden name. Lines of text had scrolled up the screen, cases, docket numbers, old addresses. One entry had opened into a PDF, a scanned document with a signature I recognized because it looked too much like my own. It wasn't a transfer. It wasn't valid. It was a letter David had drafted months ago, never filed, full of language that implied I intended to gift him a share of the house at a future date. It wasn't criminal on its face. It was worse. It was a plan. A plan is waiting for a moment. Jenna didn't have to say anything. I saw enough to understand. I turned off the lamp. The house settled around me the way a ship settles in a calm harbor after a long run in rough water. They believed I was cornered. They believed I would accept what was easiest for them. They believed wrong. In the morning, Rick would confirm the schedule. Michael would send the recorder one last letter. The title company would open escrow. And I would carry a quiet truth that would matter later, when the shouting started and the faces turned red and the neighbors peeked through the blinds. They didn't know that I already held the thing that would change everything. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. I woke to the smell of coffee and a bright square of morning sun on the kitchen floor. I measured the grounds the way I always have, slow and steady, then let the first drip hit the glass pot. Before the machine finished, Melissa walked in, still in her robe, hair pinned high like a crown. She looked at my hands, at the mug I had warmed with hot water, and she smirked. "Please don't touch the machine," she said, like a teacher scolding a child. "You always leave sugar everywhere." David came in behind her, scrolling on his phone. He didn't look up. "Dad, just sit. You move so slow it stresses everyone out." Melissa lifted the lid on the trash and dropped a brochure in, the edge catching on the rim so the cover stayed visible. A smiling couple. Palm trees. The words "assisted living" are in friendly blue. "You'd actually like it," she said. "They do activities." My mouth went dry and the coffee smelled like metal. I set the mug down and heard it click on the counter. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I let the heat rise and burn through me, and I memorized the moment as if I were carving a mark into wood. This was what they thought I deserved. This was what they believed I had become. Not a father, not a builder, not the name on the deed. An inconvenience with a pulse. By noon, Rick had arranged the first quiet walkthrough. 3 cash buyers staggered, no sign in the yard, no balloons, no noise. I opened the door and let the first man in. He wore work boots and ran his hand along the trim like a carpenter does, feeling for true lines. In the hallway, he paused at the scuff where we used to drag the Christmas tree. He smiled, didn't comment, and moved on. The second buyer stood in the living room and looked at the way the light fell across the floorboards mid-afternoon. "Good bones," he said, mostly to himself. The third buyer pressed a thumb into a porch post and nodded at the firmness. I kept my hands in my pockets so they wouldn't see them shaking, but they didn't shake. Not anymore. My fingers felt like they had when I used to sign paychecks at the kitchen table. Firm, sure, responsible for something that mattered. That evening, Michael called with the title company on the line. "We can close in 5 business days if you accept the clean offer," he said. "Funds verified. No inspection contingencies. It's straightforward." I told him yes, and the word left my mouth like a nail being set home with one clean blow. We scheduled the signing for the next morning at 9. The notary would come to Michael's office. Rick would be there with the escrow packet. I slept with the folder on the nightstand and woke before the alarm. The signing took less than 30 minutes. Paper after paper. My name over and over. Each signature was a step out of a trap I hadn't wanted to admit I was in. The notary stamped each page. The stamp made a heavy sound, a sound that said, "This happened. It's real. You can't pretend it didn't." When it was done, Michael slid a final sheet toward me. "This is your seller's proceeds wiring instruction," he said. "Double-check the account number." I read each digit out loud, slowly, then signed. When I capped the pen, my hand didn't hesitate. It felt good to put the pen down, the way it feels when a long day's work ends and you stand back from a wall you just built and see it plumb. We were packing the folder when Jenna stuck her head in the door. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, and then looked at me with the same steady kindness she'd shown all week. "There's been a filing. Your son petitioned the court last night for a temporary restraining order to halt the sale. He's claiming you're being exploited and lack capacity." She winced a little as she said it. "There's a brief hearing this afternoon. We were just served." For a second, the room tilted. Exploited? Lack of capacity? The words didn't fit the way I stood or spoke or signed that morning. Michael's jaw tightened. "They waited until after you signed to try to freeze the escrow," he said. "We'll respond. We'll win. But we need to be in that courtroom. Today." I thought of the brochure in the trash, the bright people with bright teeth, the cheerful font, assisted living, activities. I thought of Melissa's, "You'd actually like it." I thought of David's flat. "You move so slowly." I felt something in me click into place like a door lock turned from the inside. "Let's go," I said. "Let's set this right." The courthouse was old wood and stone, cool air, and a carved seal above the judge's bench. The clerk called our case. David and Melissa were already there, dressed like people dress when they want to look responsible. Melissa clutched a stack of printed spreadsheets, highlighted in neon. David spoke first, his voice pitched low in a performance of concern. He told the judge they loved me, that they were worried about me, that I was making rash decisions under the influence of an aggressive agent. He said I had grown forgetful, that I left the stove on. I put sugar in the salt jar and salt in the sugar. He gestured to Melissa's stack. "We have documentation," he said, and let the word hang like a bell. Michael didn't push back right away. He let them talk. He let their story spill out in polished sentences. When the judge nodded, he stood. "Your Honor," he said, "Mr. Miller executed a valid purchase and sale agreement this morning. We have the notarized documents. We have evidence of his capacity and intent." He handed the bailiff a slim folder and a brief. "We also have sworn statements." The judge's eyebrows moved a fraction. "From whom?" Michael turned and motioned to the back. Rick stood, hat in hand. He spoke simply. "Your Honor, I've known Tom for 30 years. He negotiated this sale like any smart seller does. He asked for off-market options. He verified every step. He knew the price, the timing, and why he wanted a clean deal. No one is pushing him. He's the one pushing us." The judge nodded and looked to the aisle again. Mrs. Green rose, my neighbor from 2 doors down, 82, her cane matching the rhythm of her steps. "Your Honor," she said, voice thin but clear, "I walk by his house every morning. He fixes that porch rail faster than my grandson can tie his shoes. He checks my mail when I'm away. He reads the paper without glasses and tells me the weather's turning before the news does. He's as sharp as any man I know." 2 sentences, nothing fancy. Truth told without decoration, it landed the way you want truth to land, solid and unforced. Michael handed up the notarized deed copies, the bank letter with the password phrase on file, and the notice to the recorder that I had authorized no transfer. "This is not a family disagreement about taste," he said. "This is an attempt to use the courts to stop a competent man from controlling his own property." He paused. "And there's context." He turned to me. "Tom, if you're willing." I stood. My knees didn't wobble. I faced the judge. "Your Honor," I said, "I built that house. I paid every bill. I signed every tax check. I have not given, promised, or implied that anyone else owns it. My son and his wife want to sell it. They want to move me into a facility so they can use the money. I am selling it myself, so they cannot. That's the whole truth." I sat down, heart steady, breath slow, like I had finally learned the tempo of my own life again. Michael slid one more document from his folder. "We submit this as Exhibit C," he said. "A certified printout of public records showing judgments against Melissa for $48,600 and small claims judgments against David totaling approximately $22,000. He kept his voice neutral, not cruel, just factual. "We also submit this, a pre-qualification letter filed with a credit union 2 weeks ago, listing anticipated funds from a future sale of Mr. Miller's residence." The judge read the totals, lips pressed into a straight line. The numbers felt loud in the room, like a drum you can't stop hearing once you notice it. 48,600, 22,000, a pre-qual that depended on my house. David flushed. Melissa shifted her feet. She reached for his arm, and he pulled away. You could feel the first crack of their unity then, hairline but deep, the way a plate cracks before it breaks. The judge looked up. "Counsel, anything further?" Michael nodded once. "One last document, Your Honor. Exhibit D." He held up a single sheet, my handwriting, old ink, the letter I had written when they first moved back in. "This is your home, too." Michael's tone didn't change. "Opposing party cites this as evidence of a gift. It is not. It is hospitality. It conveys no legal interest. It includes no deed transfer, no consideration, no notary, and no filing. It is a father's welcome, not a conveyance." The judge read the line, looked at me, then at David. The moment stretched. That's when Michael passed the last piece across. "Exhibit E," he said, and his voice had a new weight to it. "A printout from the county recorder's web portal log showing a preliminary title inquiry on Mr. Miller's parcel 2 weeks ago, accessed from an IP address registered to the petitioner's home." And attached, a draft letter found in petitioner's shared cloud folder, never filed, but using language that implies a future gift of the property from Mr. Miller to his son. He kept his gaze level. Not a crime in itself, but a plan that contradicts everything they've represented today. The room went very still. The judge looked at David. "Is there anything you wish to say about this?" David opened his mouth and closed it. He had words when the spreadsheets were his. He had phrases when I was a shdow he could move. But this was different. This was light. Melissa turned on him without moving her feet. "You told me that letter was nothing," she whispered, not quietly enough. "You said it was just an idea." Her whisper cut through the stillness like glass falling in a church. The judge raised a hand, and the sound died. The ruling was short, clean. A few paragraphs that felt like a door opening where I hadn't seen a door. Petition denied, the judge said. No competent evidence of incapacity, exploitation, or undue influence has been presented. The seller's right to convey his property stands. Petitioners are cautioned that further attempts to cloud title or interfere with the transaction may result in sanctions. He looked at me last. Mr. Miller, take care of yourself. It was a sentence I hadn't realized I needed to hear from someone with a gavel. In the hallway, Melissa's voice rose high and tight. You said you had it under control, she hissed at David. You said he wouldn't do anything. David rubbed his face with the heel of his hand like he could wipe the afternoon off it. How was I supposed to know he'd lawyer up? He said. How was I supposed to know he'd go this far? Melissa laughed once, a sound with no joy in it. It's his house, she said, and the truth of it seemed to land for the very first time. They didn't see me standing 10 feet away, not at first. When they did, David stepped toward me, jaw tight. You could have kept this in the family, he said. I met his eyes. I tried, I said, for years. Back at Michael's office, the title company confirmed the escrow would move forward. Rick called within the hour. We are clear to close, he said. Funds will hit your account tomorrow by noon. His voice carried the light of a man who likes a job done right. I thanked him and sat in the quiet office for a minute longer than I needed to. I let the relief come in like a tide and fill the low places. I let my shoulders drop. I let my jaw unclench. I felt the floor under my feet and knew it was holding me. When I pulled into the driveway, the moving truck was already there. The new owners had arranged a few early deliveries. The lock had been changed by the title company's contractor, a clean new deadbolt that turned with a smooth click. I gathered my last bag, the one with Mary's photo wrapped in a towel, and stepped inside. I touched the banister once, just once, as if it were a shoulder. Then I walked room to room and said goodbye without saying anything at all. My phone rang. David. I let it buzz, then answered. He didn't say hello. He went straight to the demand. You can't do this, he said, voice shaking. This is our home. The kids. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain. This was never your house, I said. It was mine, and now it belongs to someone else. That's the truth. It always has been. He inhaled like he was going to argue. I didn't give him the chance. This ends today. I heard the smallest sound on the line then, not words, air leaving a chest, the sound a person makes when something finally breaks inside and the shape of their life changes around it. I ended the call and turned the phone face down. Outside, Mrs. Green stood at the edge of her lawn, cane planted. She lifted her free hand. I walked over. You did right, she said. I saw you walk out of that courthouse straight. I nodded. Thank you for speaking, I said. She tilted her head and looked at me the way only someone much older can look at you, seeing more than the surface. Go find some water, she said. You need to hear waves for a while. It was the kindest prescription I'd ever been given. That night I packed the trunk with the last boxes that mattered. Papers. The flag from my brother's funeral. Mary's recipe cards had grease stains and notes in the margins. A coffee mug that says, World's Okayest Dad, in a joke David once made when he still knew how to love me without needing money to define it. I closed the trunk and looked back at the house. In the quiet, I could hear the echo of what David had said in the courtroom. Exploited, forgetful, capacity. And then I could hear the judge's answer. Petition denied. The words rang like a bell, calling people to dinner in a small town where the food is warm and the chairs are pulled out for you. As I pulled away, their car turned onto the street. Melissa saw the moving truck and the new lock. Her mouth opened and closed twice. David slowed the car to a crawl and rolled his window down. This isn't over, he said, voice raw. I looked at the two of them and saw not enemies, but two people who had built a fantasy on my back and were watching it dissolve like sugar in rain. For me it is, I said, and drove on. At the motel that night, the title company called to confirm the wire had landed. The number on the screen was clean and round and real. the lifetime value of early mornings and late nights and hands worn to callous. $500,000, less a few fees, sitting where no one could touch it but me. I put the phone down and stared at the ceiling. I thought of beans and rice dinners, of canceled vacations, of shoes I resoled twice instead of replacing them, so I could write a tuition check on time. I thought of the brochure in the trash and how the smiling couple hadn't looked anything like Mary and me. Before I turned out the light, I wrote one more letter by hand. Simple, dated, signed. To whom it may concern, it began, I, Thomas Miller, have sold my residence at the address below of my own free will. I am in full possession of my faculties. Any attempt by relatives or third parties to challenge this sale is contrary to my express wishes. I put the letter in the folder with the deed copies and the court's order. It felt like putting a last brick into place, mortar smooth, wall straight. When I closed my eyes, I saw the judge's bench, the walnut in Michael's office, the brass plate on the notary's stamp, the serious faces of strangers who had cared if I was all right. I also saw David's face when he realized the plan had failed, and Melissa's when she realized he had kept things from her. Their plan didn't just collapse from the outside. It cracked from the inside, under the weight of what they had hidden from each other. You told me it was an idea, she had said. You said it was nothing. Those sentences will live in that hallway longer than I ever will. Tomorrow will be for finding a place by the water, like Mrs. Green told me. Tomorrow will be for a small kitchen, a chair that doesn't wobble, and a coffee maker that only I touch. Tonight is for the quiet that comes when justice doesn't shout. It just stands. Feeling unseen hurts, doesn't it? If you believe every person deserves to be seen, comment the keyword seen. Now watch what they do to change that. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. The week after the court hearing felt like air finally moving through a house that had been shut up too long. The papers were filed, the funds cleared, and the weight that had sat on my chest for months finally slid off. I checked my account one last time, and there it was, in black and white, $500,000. My money, my name, my work, not theirs, not anyone else's. I leaned back in my chair and whispered to Mary's photograph, "It's done. They'll never touch what we built." For David and Melissa, the fall was quick and sharp. I heard from a neighbor that the bank declined their loan the very next week. With no house to claim, no inheritance to lean on, they were forced to pack their things and move into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town. $1,800 a month for a space with thin walls and no yard. Melissa complained loudly, I was told, about the noise from upstairs, about how the laundry room smelled like bleach and mildew. Ethan and Sophie had to share a bedroom, their desks squeezed against one wall. I could picture them trying to do homework while Melissa muttered in the kitchen and David slammed doors out of frustration. What had been dreams of wealth and freedom had turned into arguments over parking spaces and rent due dates. For me, life was a different story. I used $220,000 to buy a modest condo near the shore. Nothing extravagant, nothing that would draw attention, just a clean space with a balcony facing the ocean. The rest I left in the bank, earning interest, secure. I unpacked slowly, carefully. Mary's wedding photo went on the mantel, her recipe cards in a small tin by the stove. The chair I brought with me sat by the window. Every morning, I walked out onto that balcony, poured myself a cup of coffee, and listened to the waves. For the first time in years, the sound wasn't muffled by arguments, by whispered plans I wasn't meant to hear, by the constant fear of being pushed aside. It was just the ocean and me. And it was enough. One morning, I sat with the cup warming my hands and realized something so simple it hurt. Peace doesn't mean silence. Peace means choosing who gets to share your silence. I had been surrounded by noise, but alone. Now alone, I felt accompanied by the world itself. The sea, the gulls, the hum of life continuing without cruelty. I whispered to myself, "This is freedom." And for once, the words weren't a dream. They were a fact. David tried to reach me once. A voicemail on the old phone, his voice breaking in the middle. "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to get this far. We thought—" He trailed off. Then softer. "Please call me back." I listened once and then deleted it. My hand didn't shake. My heart didn't ache. I just knew. Forgiveness, if it ever came, wouldn't be delivered through a phone. It wouldn't be a key that unlocked what they had destroyed. I said it out loud, as if Mary were sitting across from me. I don't need their apology. I have my life. That's enough. And in that moment, I knew the truth. I had given too much for too long, trying to buy love that can't be bought. Respect isn't inherited with blood. Respect is earned every day by how you treat the people who raised you. And when your own children treat you like a burden, like a stepping stone to something richer, the only way to win is to walk away and let them stumble without you. In the evenings, I began to rediscover small joys. I planted herbs in pots on the balcony, basil and rosemary, the smell drifting through the sliding door. I joined a community club that met once a week to walk the beach and pick up litter. Nothing fancy, just neighbors laughing, bending down, filling bags, sharing coffee afterward. People learned my name not because of the house I owned or the money I had, but because of the stories I told and the hand I lent when theirs was full. Slowly, I rebuilt the life I had given away, piece by piece. Meanwhile, David and Melissa drifted further into their own wreckage. Without the promise of my house, their friends thinned out. Invitations stopped. Melissa's sister stopped visiting, tired of listening to her bitterness. David looked older in a matter of months, worn down by bills and the sharp edge of Melissa's disappointment. They had built a future on sand, and when the tide came in, it swept the whole castle away. One afternoon, I received a letter with no return address, but I recognized David's handwriting before I even opened it. Inside, 3 short lines. "Dad, I'm sorry. We need help. Please don't give up on us." I folded it once, twice, then placed it in the back of a drawer, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. They had already given up on me when they schemed, when they called me weak, when they held brochures for nursing homes while I was still making my own coffee. They had made their choice. Now I was making mine. The peace I felt in that refusal was deeper than any I had known. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't spite. It was freedom, pure and clean. I didn't need to punish them further. Life had already done that for me. What I needed was to guard the ground I stood on now, never again to trade it away for promises of family loyalty that never existed. I often sat by the ocean at dusk, the sky painted with fire and gold, and thought of Mary. I told her softly, "We were right to love them, but I am more right to protect myself now." The waves answered with their steady crash, as if they had been waiting to agree all along. This chapter of my life taught me one lesson above all. Family is not defined by shared blood, but by shared respect. And respect begins with self-respect. I had found mine again, and I swore to never let it go. I changed my phone number. I closed the drawer with David's letter still inside. I set my chair on the balcony and watched the moon rise. I whispered, "I finally belong to myself." And the quiet that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Soon I would take the next step. There was a flyer posted at the community center about a volunteer group helping seniors with meals and visits. I circled the date. It felt like a beginning, not an end. A chance to share the strength I had reclaimed, not to give it away, but to let it grow. I am free, I am whole, and I am finally at peace. Every morning now begins the same way. I wake up in my little condo by the ocean, open the sliding door, and breathe in the salt air. The sound of waves greets me like an old friend, steady and reliable. I take my coffee and head to the park just a short walk away. The benches are filled with familiar faces now, neighbors who wave, other seniors who join me for a slow walk beneath the trees. Sometimes we talk about nothing important, the weather, a ball game, the price of groceries. Yet those conversations feel richer than any dinner table where I was treated like a burden. Here, among people who owe me nothing, I feel seen, respected, even valued. I never thought peace could be this simple. A morning walk, a warm cup, a laugh with a new friend. After all the years of pouring myself out for a son who saw me only as a means to his gain, I realize now that life is not about giving everything until you are empty. It is about choosing wisely where to give and protecting the heart you have left. That realization has become my anchor. Some afternoons I sit on the balcony with a journal. I write down reflections, not because I need anyone to read them, but because I need to remember. I remind myself of the lesson I carried out of that house. Family is not defined by blood alone. True family is made of those who honor you, who respect your boundaries, who stand beside you when you have nothing left to give. I whisper sometimes, "I finally understand, Mary. Respect is love in its truest form." With that understanding came the freedom to give in a different way. I joined a volunteer group that helps deliver meals to homebound seniors. Once a week, I drive to the center, load up containers of soup, sandwiches, and fruit, and bring them to people who remind me of myself a few years ago. Tired, overlooked, vulnerable. Some of them cry when they open the door. Some just nod, embarrassed by needing help. I tell them what I wish someone had told me. You are not a burden. You matter. Every time I say it, it feels like I am speaking to myself too, healing the wounds that betrayal left behind. My pain has turned into strength, not just for me, but for others. Every story has two sides, and I still hear whispers of David and Melissa's life now. They remain in that cramped rental, $1,800 a month, draining them dry. Melissa is bitter, complaining to anyone who will listen about how unfair life has been. David works long hours, but seems worn down, older than his years. I know they've tried to reach me, letters, voicemails, even through old friends. But I keep my line quiet. They had their chance when I sat at their table and begged for respect. Now their voices have no claim on me. The contrast between our lives is clear. They live surrounded by walls of their own making, and I live surrounded by the wide-open sky. Not long ago, a letter came in the mail with handwriting I didn't recognize at first. It wasn't from David. It was from Ethan, my grandson. Just a few sentences in shaky script. "Grandpa, I'm sorry. I didn't understand before. I hope you are happy." I held the page for a long time, letting the words wash over me. A part of me ached because no child should be caught in the middle of greed and betrayal. But I also knew this was not my burden to carry anymore. I folded the letter, placed it gently in the same drawer where Mary's recipes live, and chose not to reply. The chapter is closed. I smiled, not with bitterness, but with peace. Some doors must stay shut so new ones can open. Life has given me unexpected kindness in other ways, too. One morning, as I left the park, a little girl ran up with a dandelion in her hand. She pressed it into my palm without a word, then skipped back to her mother. That tiny flower reminded me that the world is still full of goodness, often from strangers with no obligation to me. It was as if life itself was whispering, "You were right to step out of the darkness. There is light here." I carried that dandelion home and placed it in a glass of water on my kitchen table. For days I watched it bend toward the sun, and I thought, that is what I am doing too. I live with clarity now. David may still try to rewrite the past. Melissa may still spit anger into the air, but their choices are theirs to carry. Mine is to live free, to stand tall, to protect the dignity that should have been honored all along. I no longer wait for apologies or chase reconciliation. I choose boundaries because boundaries are love directed inward. This story, my story, carries lessons not just for me, but for others. For parents, I would say this: do not let your sacrifices become chains. Love your children, yes, but never at the cost of your own dignity. Keep control of your life, your assets, your voice. If you do not protect your worth, others may try to strip it away. For children, I would say, remember who fed you, who worked long hours to pay your tuition, who gave up dreams so you could chase yours. Betrayal might bring short-term gain, but in the end, you will lose what matters most: trust, respect, and the love that only parents can give. And for all of us living in this modern world, I would remind you, blood alone does not guarantee loyalty. Human nature can bend under greed, but character is the only inheritance that lasts. Now, when I sip my coffee on the balcony, the ocean spreads wide before me, and I think to myself, I finally found the place I belong. Each day is proof that I chose well, proof that I can turn betrayal into strength, proof that even when family turns against you, life still offers community, kindness, and dignity. I look again at Mary's picture on the mantel and whisper, they cannot take who I am. They cannot touch what we built inside of me. And I believe it with my whole heart. The final truth is simple. Money can be stolen, houses can be sold, but character is the only treasure no one can take from you. That I will carry to my last breath. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.